So as regular viewers of my show are well aware, I often catch politicians, judges, PACs, bureaucrats, and others breaking the law. Now sometimes I can report these violations, and sometimes, just maybe sometimes, they actually have some micro level of accountability for their law breaking. So let's review a few recent cases, and I'll give you an update on more that are coming down the river in the new future here. Now, before I go any further, I want to remind everyone watching to share, like, and subscribe to this channel. It costs you absolutely nothing. And it does help our channel get a little bit more visibility, the more who actually take those simple steps down below. Also, feel free to leave me a comment if I'm missing anything. I actually try to respond to in most of those comments. If you have some inside information that I should know, I do try to read them all, and I try to respond to most of them when I get a chance. So, okay, on to those politicians who can't help themselves and always seem to be breaking the law. Now, I'll point out that I have made a hobby out of catching these guys over the past few years. And I started documenting all the ones that I've caught, and you can verify those source documents and the complete list that I've linked down below. And at the time that I'm filming this video, this actually includes a total of 209 politicians, PACs, judges, etc., who have not just been caught and exposed by our efforts, but many of them fined or financially penalized as a result. That's actually 81 of them out of that group, and about the other 128, they've been formally sanctioned for their law breaking. Now, that's why I'm probably not on their Christmas card list anymore. And this really includes everybody from Governor Inslee to local school board members and all these different people in between. Most of these sanctions or fines came through the Public Disclosure Commission or the state, Washington State's local ethics boards. And that includes 19 Attorney General lawsuits that we actually forced A.G. Ferguson to initiate. Now, obviously, this is just a drop in the bucket. We've caught a lot more breaking the law. But they can often exert influence to escape consequences, or perhaps the agency tasked with enforcing the law is just afraid to enforce it when it probably should be applied to the powerful and politically connected as well. Now, regardless, we do keep exposing them, and we won't stop exposing them just because the system often fails to do anything about it. We will also not stop just because traditional media refuses to report the truth, do their job, or hold the political class accountable. Besides, if we don't do this, who else will? So before we get to this recent batch of violators, I want to remind my viewers that most of these violators are caught because you and people just like you will often send us evidence of their law breaking. We do catch a lot of them out of the blue, but sometimes the tips and insider information, that really does help us greatly. And that has been a primary driver for my website and my work over the past 10 years or so, regardless. So I want to remind you to keep that information coming. Don't keep it to yourself. It's always good if you can share it with others. Now, to make it most effective, I do suggest that you don't just say, A.G. Bob Ferguson's a dirty, no-good lawbreaker and he's corrupt. That all might be very true, but evidence is really helpful. If you know he stole money or grifted taxpayer dollars to his friends, you got to tell me when, who, and how much, or whatever you actually know or can prove. We do have many sources who help, but confirmation, documents, specific details that can be verified, those really are actually the things that lead to something useful. Everything else tends to just be background noise. And yes, I know politicians and bureaucrats are often corrupt, but that's like saying that the sun's going to rise tomorrow. Give me details, and then we can do something about it. So let's start with a few people who broke the law and have recently been sanctioned or fined just based on some of the things I've done. First, we have a left-leaning candidate here who decided to challenge Sheriff Fortney for the sheriff's race later this year in Snohomish County. Her name is Susanna Johnson, and by the way, you can't always be sure someone's running for a nonpartisan position, whether they lean one position politically or not. But you can get a pretty good idea based on their donors, so always look at the PDC. Her donors do tend to be left-leaning, including some hardcore, very harmful lefty legislators. So she apparently attempted to conceal her personal financial affairs statement entirely from the public when she filed to run for office late last year. So I filed a complaint, and she was formally sanctioned by the Public Disclosure Commission for this violation just last week. However, this was a relatively minor violation compared to the others. So secondly, and as I discussed in a recent article I wrote, and as I mentioned last year after I filed the original complaint, this kind of sad saga of Democrat Thurston County Assessor Stephen Drew, was a much more serious and egregious violation of campaign finance laws and ethics laws. In his case, he used the power of his position to extort campaign cash from the employees who depended on him for their jobs and careers. And the violation was clear, and frankly, it was the second time that he's been caught doing this exact same thing. In my opinion, the Public Disclosure Commission seriously dropped the ball on this one. And even though he admitted guilt and he paid a nominal fine for getting caught, this is really poor public policy because it is the same behavior that it's going to just basically encourage that same behavior in future politicians. Now, if an elected official, particularly in backwater, lower profile, offices like Thurston County, if they can abuse their power positions like this and extort cash from employees for their political campaign at the threat of advancement or even their job, and all the PDC does is just give them a wrist slap or a microfine, well, a smaller fine even than he got last time when he was caught doing the exact same thing, then I think the Public Disclosure Commission is sending a pro-corruption message to other elected officials. Our complaint was righteous, well documented, and Thurston County Assessor Stephen Drew admitted guilt again. But wrist slap penalties like this only encourage more dishonest and corrupt behavior, which really isn't good. Hopefully he doesn't screw up the property assessment records now even more. Now, by the way, in this Stephen Drew example, many people, including employees who work there, felt that the fact that he only worked 17 days out of the last 2 years, that was illegal activity, and it was not. It might be unethical and dishonest, but it was not illegal. In fact, again, failure to show up at work very often for an elected official might appear to be a dereliction of duty on Stephen Drew's part. He probably was doing the employees a real favor because he is, reportedly, according to them, such an unpleasant person at work that the days that he was there were so miserable and hostile to these employees that it was much better for morale and just human decency when he was not in the office. So there is no law requiring an elected official like Stephen Drew to actually show up to work. But he crossed into illegal territory when he started extorting the employees who worked for him for campaign contributions and support his political campaign. I mean, that violation of the law is actually what he was fined for this year. And the last time also a few years ago when he broke that same law back then. Guys like this, I don't think they can really help themselves. Now, my critique, by the way, as I wrote the recent article on this issue, and I've linked to that down below, was not so much about Stephen Drew's illegal and hostile actions themselves. He's always been this way. No, my real critique is actually for the Public Disclosure Commission. They really need to be able to properly distinguish between simple violations like the one against Susanna Johnson, as I referenced earlier, which was a basic lawbreaker who probably deserves a wrist slap as a first-time offender, and Stephen Drew, who's a habitual offender, not just of basic transparency and campaign finance reporting, but of mental abuse and illegal activity directed at extorting staff for campaign cash. The Public Disclosure Commission can't make a dog change spots, but they are supposed to train the dogs not to pee in the house, which means they need to adequately punish and bad behavior like this, and they need to adequately do it enough that it would discourage further violations. Now, another politician lawbreaker who finally was fined after just this ridiculously drawn out over a year investigation was Lynwood City Councilman Joshua Binda. I actually filed a complaint against him in late 2021. Now, I wasn't the only one who filed a complaint against this guy, and he was also fined $250 for failing to disclose his financial information by PDC staff during this whole time. However, he was recently fined $1,000, and he was more importantly forced to reimburse over $2,900 that he essentially misappropriated from his campaign account, and then he used it for personal non-campaign uses, like trips to Versace, jewelry, haircuts, fancy travel, etc. And here's the takeaway that I have for this guy's violation. Okay, some leftist groups go to some BLM protests, and then they recruit a few young kids to run for office, Joshua Binda being one of them. And it's not because they're prepared to do so or because they have any life experience, but because the vendors see them as cash cows for their own grift. Mr. Binda gets out of control, squandering cash on himself and failing to even pretend to follow the law. He's so extremely out of control that his professional treasurer actually quits, knowing the legal blowback isn't worth it. Now, the consultants take their large paychecks, which was the majority of the money he raised. And in this case, the consultant was mostly cashing in on Seattle's weird democracy vouchers, and Binda up in Lynwood was just a sideshow for him. So now, while Binda's dealing with this second PDC investigation, kicking back cash and sorting out a relatively minor fine with the PDC, he was simultaneously violating the state's ethics laws and the local ethics laws at the city of Lynwood for trying to misuse public resources for some kind of this cash payout lefty grifting tour to finance his lifestyle while he's in public office. Now, it's sort of weird and obnoxious and avoidable if there were any adults out there trying to help new politicians who are clearly in over their head and getting zero honest direction from somebody sane who can at least help them grift and steal the public cash in a less illegal way. I mean, come on now. A lot of these guys do it in our political class, and it's certainly unethical and dishonest, but at least it isn't illegal the way they do it. So someone needs to sit down with Councilman Binda and help him learn how to steal the money legally. And he should talk to former Speaker Frank Chop or Kshama Sawant or some other lefty politician who lives a life of political grift. Or better yet, maybe someone can just reach out to him and just help him stop breaking the law constantly. It really isn't that hard. Now, finally, just to let you know, the Washington State Legislative Ethics Board is still investigating the 11 state senators. These are the first 4 senators and then the 9 legislators that I caught a few months ago. And while they have had a few preliminary hearings and some of the investigative work has been done, I've yet to see any final results from that investigation. Now, at the most, I'd expect a few wrist slaps, but it is worth tracking that case. And I've linked to the video and articles down below if you want to learn more about that one as well. This is also related to the State Executive Ethics Board, which is also technically investigating Inslee. But no matter how many laws he breaks, that board is entirely controlled by the governor's office. So there's no external accountability, and I'd not expect to see any, but it might be fun to actually see how they contort themselves into some kind of excuse justifying Governor Inslee's illegal activity. Now remember, misusing public resources for political campaigns is usually okay if you're a Democrat, but not if you are unfortunate enough to identify with some other political party. So we'll just have to see how it goes. And still, I like to make them go through these motions to cover it up. And sometimes I'm pleasantly surprised when somebody gets even just a wrist slap or at least a naughty naughty letter. It can be worth it even if that's all they get. Now, so in closing, I've told you before that this is one of my hobbies, and it's a useful hobby at that, I think. If you want to help hold these guys accountable as well, you can also send me information about your local elected officials and others who are abusing their office, breaking the law, stealing money, or just doing what big government types do and grift the system. You never know when we can put the spotlight on their bad behavior, and maybe, on occasion, just reduce the volume of corruption moving forward. So, I have 3 takeaways, basically, for anybody watching here. Number 1, just pay attention to your local elected officials. If it looks like they're doing something wrong, then, number 2, document their violations, or at least what you think might be a violation. Let's see if we can confirm if it is a violation in the first place, which will ultimately lead to, number 3, exposing their violation. So send me what you have. Let's see if we can expose the truth, and let's see if we can expose it for others to see, and perhaps even dig deeper once they know that these things are happening. That's how you begin to make a difference, in my opinion. We can all do this, and we all have a part to play. Politics and the political process, that's really not a spectator sport. We all get to participate, and often, whether we like to or not. But it does start with us, because in the end, the future belongs to those who show up.